So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our first discussion and video podcast about the situation in Belarus. And we have, so who is we? Iryna is one of the most important people according to the so-called opposition, but we try to avoid the word opposition because actually it's the democracy movement and the importance or the legal status of the current so-called government or regime in Belarus is quite disputed and for a lot of valid reasons. So Iryna is a representative in Vienna, and we have also, what I'm very happy about, a representative of Bratislava here. Please introduce yourself to us.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Aliaksei Kazharski, and I'm originally from Belarus, but I live in Bratislava, which is, yes, like you said previously, next door. I work at Comenius University, Faculty of Social and Economic Sciences. I also teach at Charles University in Prague, but now obviously only virtually. So I'm a researcher and a lecturer. I focus on IR, international relations, political science. And yes, so this is a topic that is interesting both professionally, but obviously also personally. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So I saw that you also studied at the University or Institute for Human Science or Institut for Menschen, it's called in German, in Vienna, yes?
Yeah, the IWM. Well, I didn't
Yeah.
study there. It's not an institute that has students. I was a visiting
lecturer, researcher. Yeah, you.
Researcher. Yeah. No. I mean, it doesn't do teaching. It's a research institution. Let's put it that way.
So you know Anton Shekochov?
Well, not closely, but we've met.
Okay, because he was also attending our huge Belarus event during August, and he supported it quite strongly. So, okay, so we are right on topic. What are your impressions about the current situation if we are talking about the last 3 or 4 weeks? What if we are talking about the audience that is actually following the events in Belarus, what would you tell them? What are your insights and special information about the last 4 weeks? Because some people have the impression that the stage of violence is actually even increasing.
Yes, well, unfortunately, that was the impression that some people got from the past 2 weeks, that the situation is basically going back to August. August was when violence was extreme. The 3 days, rather the 3 nights of terror, they called them, when the crackdowns were unprecedentedly brutal, right? With all these reports of torture in prisons, which are now officially registered with the UN human rights bodies. Even though, of course, the authorities would deny that, but there are complaints that are filed to the UN about torture. So there were these 3 nights of terror, which shocked basically the Belarusian society in a way that it's never happened before, and that actually triggered those mass protests that we saw in the weeks of August, which the authorities kind of, I guess, did not anticipate. So they were also shocked by that. They didn't know what to do. These chains of solidarity, and then hundreds or even several hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, not only in Minsk but also in other towns and even villages sometimes. So the authorities had to back down. I mean, there was no violence or insignificant violence in these August weeks. But now it seems that the situation is coming back to the kind of early August situation. So the regime is getting increasingly repressive, right? So what it's trying to do, of course, is it's trying to stop these mass protests because they have a major delegitimizing effect on the regime, not only in the eyes of the citizens, because obviously that's something that if you are authoritarian, you want to avoid that impression that the majority is against you. Mm-hmm. That's what the Belarusian president, the government always tried to do, to create this image of a majority that either supports or is indifferent to the regime, and those in the opposition were always presented as this kind of dissenting minority that is not to be taken seriously. And then you have these beautiful, absolutely unbelievable images of thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. So people thought of themselves as a majority, political majority. So that has a delegitimizing effect on the regime inside the country, but also obviously, here's where you have the geopolitical context, right? You have a delegitimizing effect in the eyes of the Kremlin, Moscow, Lukashenko's main supporter, main friend. And if you have these hundreds of thousands of people, week after week after week after week, that sends a very unpleasant signal to Moscow that this guy cannot manage the situation, in the way in which he successfully managed it for the past 20 years or so, 25. So obviously, this is something that had to be ended from the government's perspective. So the regime got increasingly repressive. So it now is trying to stop, and it managed to stop these large protests that would happen in the center of Minsk by not allowing people to actually gather to form a single crowd, right? So the protests had to be decentralized. So in a sense, this also went back to the kind of decentralized format of the protests that we saw in August. Except, of course, now the shock seems to be gone. So the repression is gaining momentum. But how efficient that repression will be in terms of silencing the protests completely, that we are yet to see, because decentralized protest is also more difficult to suppress, because you have to run around the city, different parts of the city, and obviously the riot police and other units, they have limited capacities, right? They're also exhausted.
There is the question if this, you mentioned the riot police and the so-called OMON forces. Is there a decreasing support within the authorities? Because a couple of months ago already, there was this slight hope that some people would come to senses and say, we stop the violence and we have to listen to the people, and actually we are on the wrong side. And this is my first question. And the other question is, you mentioned the geopolitical impact of the whole situation in Belarus, and also you mentioned the United Nations, and I have always thought about the United Nations as an instrument, international organization that we actually need, but somehow it's not very efficient because so many countries there are authoritarian regimes. And what we also have to mention is that there are many countries within the United Nations that are not only authoritarian regimes, but also allies of Belarus, and they did not change their position. They congratulated Lukashenko to his so-called presidency. And what is your recent view about the developments according to the allies of Belarus, and what about the authorities?
Okay, so there are two questions then. You asked about the kind of dissent inside the riot police and the broader law enforcement, if we can call them that at this point. Yeah, I mean, we had these cases. We had these cases, if not in the riot police, in the broader kind of law enforcement apparatus, where policemen were basically resigning. They wanted nothing to do with that. And there are other, on the broader scale, there are other cases of ambassadors resigning. So the Belarusian ambassador to Slovakia resigned. He was actually the first one to resign in August in protest against the terror, the violence. And there were several others that resigned. And yes, the policemen were also resigning, if not the riot police and the broader law enforcement, but not on a scale which would lead to collapse of the repressive apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It didn't get that far, and obviously the government is very nervous about that because that sets an example. Now, what's happening in the riot police, the kind of the main fists of repression, the brainwashed, supposedly brainwashed and loyal policemen who are doing all the dirty work of beating people up. Well, that's a bit of a black box, right? We don't know. I mean, there are some reports that there are also tensions inside the riot police units. So far, that did not have any visible effect. I mean, there's different kinds of rumors, different kinds of gossip about that, but it's obvious that they are exhausted also by this, by the necessity to actually do something every Sunday, and maybe not even every Sunday, but sometimes every day, because there are other protests happening during the week, like the Pensioners' March, traditionally on Mondays. So they're exhausted and frustrated. I mean, that's quite obvious. But not to the point where they would just sort of give up, because there's a lot of peer pressure and brainwashing, obviously, and also there's economic dependence, because many of those people actually depend severely in terms of their economic well-being on the regime, because many of them have mortgages, for instance, and their mortgages are conditional on their being members of the riot police. So it's a very difficult, in many ways, it's a very difficult decision that they have to make. Now, well, the United Nations. I mean, I teach IR and I research IR, so I tend not to be naive about the kind of in terms of my expectations. I mean, of course, it would be naive to think that the UN is going to come and save you, because most of the times it doesn't. Right? And like you said, they're different allies of the Belarusian government in the UN, and of course, Russia and China are in the Security Council, so they're likely to veto any meaningful action against the official government. But I think it's important that these things at least make it to the UN. I mean, that they're on the table, that they're discussed, which increases the visibility of the Belarusian situation, because there's a lot of things going on at the same time. There's Armenia, Azerbaijan, now there's Ethiopia. Plenty of things around, and it's easy to get lost, to get lost in these things. So that's the kind of limited role that the UN can play as a place where things are talked about, at least.
I have a very long.
By the way, sorry, you could see how nervous the representatives of the official government were when Tsikhanouskaya was in the UN. She was giving a speech, and the official representatives of Belarus and some other countries, they were trying to sort of make noise, so as not to allow her to speak, which means that they are concerned about that as a platform. The UN being a platform for the opposition or the democratic movement, whichever you want to call it.
So if we are talking about the UN, we should not only talk about resolutions, we should also talk about the UN as a platform, in a sense of, let's say, publicity for a cause, yeah?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, okay. So now I have a very local question. You are in Bratislava. You are a representative of Belarus in Slovakia. I discussed a lot with Iryna about the situation in Vienna, about the situation in Austria, how to gain awareness for the situation in Belarus. And I remember that in 2014, when the Euromaidan came to Ukraine, it was very difficult to discuss the whole topic in Vienna. Russian propaganda was very dominant, was actually dominating social media especially, and people were not aware of the actually happening there, and the solidarity was quite low. In my opinion, solidarity is still not as I wish it would be, but it's much better than in 2014. The propaganda influence is weaker, it seems, maybe because there are so many things going around on the world that certain influencers are not able to focus on a situation. But yeah, so this is my view about Vienna and Austria. And as I told Iryna already a lot of times, I think it's better than it used to be, according to our, because we are neutral and we are very weak when we have to react on authoritarian regimes, because in economics we are always involved with them, yeah, A1 and etc. Yeah, so I'm very interested what your experiences in Slovakia are. How do people react? How do politicians react? And what is the public reactions or public opinion about the situation in Belarus?
In Slovakia.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like you said, it's a change. It's definitely a change as compared to 2014. I mean, we can discuss, for a long time we can discuss why there is a difference, but well, different countries in different cases, different situations. But I think if we compare Belarus to Belarus, several years ago or 10 years ago, I think the level of awareness and the level of solidarity is incomparable. I mean, I could not, when I came to Slovakia, that was, what, 11 years ago, I could, that the flag, the red, white flag, would be, flying on some official buildings in Bratislava, or actually that the Bratislava city castle that you see in the background, that is going to be dressed in red, white colors. Because when I came to Slovakia, I actually had to explain to everybody why is it that we have two flags, right? The official one and the unofficial one, right? The historical one, and the government one, the regime one. So now that needs no explanation, right? So the visibility of Belarus increased tremendously. And I think, of course, I mean, there's a horrible price that had to be paid for this, but this is one of the developments that is definitely positive. That in symbolic terms, I no longer have to explain about the flag and sort of the background, the background of Belarus's modern history. I mean, of course, solidarity is something that you may always want more of, and there's also a limit to how much people can do to help you. But I think, I mean, there are some absolutely fascinating examples. For instance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Slovakia, Mr. Korchok, he dedicated a press conference, if I'm not mistaken, it was a press conference, to debunking anti-Belarusian propaganda, disinformation, where he explained, that no, this is not a coup, no, this is not a pro-Western coup, and no, these symbols are not fascist, and et cetera, et cetera. So basically, he did what journalists and analysts are supposed to do, to debunking the disinformation narratives. Again, I mean, this looked absolutely amazing, and also, well, I mean, I can use this as a chance to thank my new friends in Slovakia, whom I met in August, and there were Slovaks who organized the first peaceful protest next to the Belarusian embassy in Bratislava. It wasn't me. I mean, it wasn't us. It wasn't the Belarusians. It was the Slovaks who actually came up with the idea to have these weekly protests. I mean, I joined in later, several days later, when I saw the first event on Facebook. That was absolutely amazing, and I mean, my deepest gratitude goes to these people, to these Slovaks who displayed the solidarity with Belarus, you know, on their own, initiative. Um, yeah, so the visibility has increased and solidarity has increased. That's clear.
So if we are talking about not only Slovakia or Austria, if we are talking about the European Union, what can we actually do to support the democracy movement? What kind of we were discussing solidarity a lot, but what are the actual political tools we could now use, and what are your suggestions? What could be done more in the next weeks or months?
Well, I mean, um, the first thing to do is not to forget that the situation exists, because you know how the media reality works. That you have news that are sometimes very impressive, and then people just move on to other news and they forget that there's something is going on. I mean, that's what happens to civil wars. I mean, like Syria, people just get used to this reality that something horrible is happening somewhere else. So, not to forget and not to get used to this, and also to understand that this is a process. The democracy in Belarus is a process. It may be a long process, right? It's a process that needs support, but it's not. It may not. It might not happen overnight, and people tend to get tired of the same agendas. You know, there's a support. There's a lot of support for Ukraine at some point, and then came something they call the Ukraine fatigue. People were just tired of the same agenda, the same problems. So not to forget, right? Not to forget, not to get used to violence, to repression, which might become normalized over time. You know, we'll just get used to having North Korea on your borders. So that shouldn't happen. And I mean, directly related to that is, of course, the idea that you have to remind Belarusians that they're not alone. That you know that the EU is watching, that the world is watching, that they're going to get support for their peaceful initiatives. And if somebody had to suffer, like you know, getting kicked out of college or work, that they are going to get help, right? That these students who were expelled from universities, that, for instance, they have a chance to go somewhere else and study, right? So these targeted help uh, to those Belarusians that are active in the democratic movement. I mean, what else? There's a number of instruments that are being discussed. I mean, I obviously there's the nuclear option of economic sanctions, that are, you know, that's some people have been discussing this for years, that the EU could stop buying Belarusian oil or gas, basically the oil derivatives that are re-exported from Belarus to the EU. Now, I find this ethically problematic for me to argue in favor of economic sanctions, because I don't live in Belarus. Although obviously I have friends and relatives there, but it doesn't look very good when somebody from the outside sort of begins to argue in favor of economic sanctions. But I can tell you very impartially, I can tell you that my observation is that these ideas are beginning to sink in. That people in Belarus who were previously not in favor of economic sanctions are beginning to think that maybe this is something that is going to be inevitable. But that's something that you need to ask them, you know, whether they want this or not.
I
think it's
heard
very
some
important.
voices that people said actually in Belarus or in Minsk or other cities, they said something like, maybe we have sanctions now, then we have to suffer, but we do not suffer as long as we would suffer without them. Yeah. So this is an optimistic approach, of course, optimistic and realistic at the same time, because of course, economic sanctions are always a little bit disputed, no matter how what your opinion is about the general cause, because the outcome, and some people also say that sanctions do not lead to a change of behavior. Their only effect is that things are not going completely out of control. Yeah, but it's very difficult to. I share and I understand your opinion about economic sanctions, even if they might be a key to a quicker or a faster change in the situation. So we are almost out of time. Iryna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, what should I add? I mean, the only point I could somehow bring to our discussion is maybe the last meetings, last events in which was happening in Vienna, and maybe I could talk about what kind of work by we I mean the Belarusian people in Austria, what kind of work we're doing. Yeah, but it's what I'm happy about that most of our visits first for 3 weeks we were placed to see Svetlana Tikhanovskaya with one official visit in Vienna. She was meeting the Mr. Chancellor Kurz, and they had really nice talks. So we are counting with some kind of support of our idea, of our intentions. Yes, and I mean it's will be just my small part, because the Alex told everything, because it's his topic. He described the situation almost perfectly. Yeah, in my opinion. Yes, that's why I was just hearing to you and yeah. But if you have any question or whatever else, or I mean maybe it's makes maybe it makes some sense that Alex has questions for to Austria to us, or to leave it to the coffee after.
Sure. No, I mean it's difficult to cover all these things in 35 minutes. So we went over the most basic things, but you know there might be some questions from I don't know. Can we have questions from the audience, or because I don't see
Uh,
anyone?
yeah, it's a recording, so
Okay.
it's like a video podcast. Yeah, so
Okay.
no audience, because the risk of trolling is too high.
That is true. That is true.
And because if you have certain topics, then there's always a risk of but yeah, I think we stay in touch. You're welcome to Vienna, of course. Like Iryna mentioned, we have good coffee, but I know in Bratislava there's also good coffee, because we are very close to each other. And thanks for sharing your expertise and your opinions. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
And we will keep you updated about our next discussions. Not all of them are in English; some of them are in German. Yeah, we have some contacts to MEPs. Iryna is very connected to the Austrian political society already. She meets MPs, MEPs. Yeah, she has a lot of friends and supporters in the political sphere already. And yeah, we are very glad that, like you also mentioned before, in 2014 it was very different, because politicians were, maybe because Russia was so obviously involved, they were a little bit afraid to take a stance, to have an opinion. And now Russia is also involved, like we all know, because they have an openly support for Lukashenko. But it's quite an internal affair also. We are talking about the repression regime and everything. So maybe this is the reason that politicians are a little bit more willing to stand up for a cause and democracy, human rights, etc.
Yeah, and also Russian disinformation. I mean, you can see how I mean, of course, it's still very powerful, but you can see how people actually get a better sense of what Russia is or what Russia is doing, because obviously, in 2008 with the Russian-Georgian War, the West tried to be very impartial, and then after that, the realization that Russia is doing all sorts of subversive things also to the West. That's the realization that that was gradually sinking in, and I think by now it's somewhat more difficult. Fortunately, it's somewhat more difficult for the Kremlin to trick the Western public, because they've seen the extent to which Russia is prepared to go with Crimea, but also with East Ukraine and the Malaysian airplane. So these things just add up gradually. If you told somebody in 2008 or 2007 that Russia is going to annex Crimea, then you would, yeah, whatever. Nobody would buy into that. But now, I think the background is quite different, against which.
Recently, I had a discussion about disinformation, and also especially Russian disinformation. I discussed with an expert from Germany, and we both agreed that the situation now is terrible, because we have the COVID-19 crisis, of course, and this is a trigger. This is a hot topic, and hot topics are always about conspiracy theories in a quite short time. But what we also can see, that if we take a look at the classics, like you mentioned, Russian disinformation, they have not those, so we are not so open to the propaganda anymore. We know what Russia Today is about. Even if they call it RT, we know what Sputnik News is. We know, some even know what Piarvoikina, etc. means. And so I think this is only a very narrow target group they can reach right now, compared to 2014, when actually everybody was confused, almost everybody, except the people who have a kind of deeper knowledge about Eastern European issues. So yeah, so this is a little bit of optimistic intel we can provide for this cause.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you very much for visiting us. Have a good evening, and I hope you get some good news in the next weeks, and that we can continue our discussion in a positive view of a development we are in favor of.
Okay, thank you much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.